Hello and welcome everybody to Purpose, Passion and Grit, where we talk in depth about people who have overcome obstacles, broken barriers, taken risks and forged new paths. Our guests have included legendary polar explorers and mountaineers, incredible sports personalities. They have ranged from people overcoming disabilities to those working undercover in dangerous places. Today's guest has forged an exceptional path. He escaped to childhood with an alcoholic father and joined the military, becoming a commando medic in the Royal Marines. His job, to save lives in hostile environments. A whole career later, he's still doing it and is passionate about his work, but not as a Marine commander. The thing is that danger in far-flung places and warfare itself has changed enormously in recent decades. Yes, you have soldiers, but civilians so often bear the brunt, and conflict zones are filled with aid workers, journalists, and as we've seen in Ukraine, even politicians. They all need to be kept safe. And there are those places that can suddenly turn into a nightmare where businesses operate with staff, and there are those where organized crime is rife with drug trafficking and kidnapping and the rest. Keeping people safe in those environments is what our guest does for a living, so welcome. Tony Loughran to Goldster, Purpose, Passion and Grit.
Thank you very much, Humphrey, for that fantastic dynamic introduction, and I'm really, really pleased to be here. It's fantastic. Super.
It's great. It's great to see you now. Now, we're at an earlier time today, which we even messed up between ourselves. And we're 9 o'clock in the morning here. You're in Australia, which is why we're at an earlier time. And is that a real background we're seeing there, or is that a virtual thing like mine?
My kind of, Star Wars kind of thing. I think at the end of the day, like I've got a little kind of departure lounge there with a lady disappearing with a suitcase and, going on from there. It was just something I'd fiddled around with, and all of a sudden it actually came to me, and I thought, that's fantastic. And your editor seemed to like it as well, so we thought we'd leave it in. That's the way it goes.
It looks great. Now, your company, and we're going to go into how you built it. You founded and run a company now called Zero Risks.
Yes.
Now, in my thinking, that is no risk, but can you really guarantee that?
No, you can't. That's the illusion that probably people would think as well, or the conception that people have. But I think at the end of the day that it was a name that I came up with some time ago because I wanted people to think about a zero risk and to actually aim towards that particular kind of aspect. And that was important to me because people could then see what kind of goal they needed to achieve really with whatever they did, whether it was journalism, whether it was media, so on and so forth from their production work. So that's
okay, so zero risks is the ambition. But your clients know, or I was your sort of de facto client at one stage, know that there is going to be an element of risk if they're dealing with you because they're dangerous places.
Yeah, and there's the polar opposite. You can have the total risk really, where at the end of the day, everyone wants to avoid or whatever, or certainly from a journalistic point of view, you're drawn towards. But the main objective really, to be honest with Humphrey, is to actually make sure you've got the controls to bring it down to a zero risk and to get it to that particular place as much as possible, really.
Yeah. Now, we've got a lot to go through in this hour, not least your work in the current crises, Afghanistan and Ukraine, and you're going to be talking us through some pictures later on, but I want to ground it. How did it all start? What made you as a young man want to join the military?
I had a really kind of interesting kind of life. And about the age of 10, I kind of went to Malta with my uncle, who was a writer at the time, Peter Loughran. And he took me around Malta, and I thought to myself, oh my God, this is a place where the sea is green and not brown, not the Mersey brown as we once knew anyway. So at the end of
the British Sea.
Yes, indeed. So, and I was thinking to myself, I got the bug for travel, I think at a very early age. So I thought to myself, really, what I'd like to do is to figure out what I can do. And it wasn't until I was probably about 17 or 18, I was heading for the wrong side of the track. And, I was getting with the wrong crowd and riding motorbikes, fast motorbikes and so on and so forth. And what happened was I was working in a bar, a true story. Guy walks in and he's got these two beautiful ladies on his arms, and he's got some money in his pocket. And he says, look, and I said, well, what do you do? And he said, I've joined the Navy. And I said, well, that's the job I need at the end of the day. So I marched down to I marched down to Victoria House in Liverpool, and I signed up, and I was panicking. I was really panicking because I'd failed all my GCSEs and my A levels as well, and I felt to myself, I'm not going to be able to cut this at all. I'm going to try my best to take the entrance exam and give it a go. And luckily, what happened was I got a very good score. I got a high score on my particular entrance test, so that put me into the bracket of medic. And that's how I really came to thinking about joining up at the time, Humphrey, because I was a bit lost, as a kid. And as many kids do at a certain age, they really don't know what they want to do. My father was always taking the mickey out of me and saying to me, like, what job is it today, Tony? What do you want to do? So anyway, I went for it, and that was.
And you mentioned, as we were talking, and in your notes, about having an alcoholic father. Give us an idea of that environment and what you were bouncing off, as it were, as a young man.
I had a very, very difficult time with my father, and I've only really started to come to terms with it in the last couple of years, because realistic, what happened to me, in a sense, I was reaching out for his love, for his particular, affection, for his acknowledgement of things that I did. But I could never get it, because at the end of the day, he lived through the bottle, effectively. He was a very strange character, where if he hadn't been drinking at all, you could hold a fantastic conversation with him, and he could rattle off the actual Times crossword like in seconds, and he's very intelligent, a very, very intelligent man. And the problem I had really was that he was a docker, a hard-working stevedore on the docks, and he was actually kind of going out at lunchtime and drinking there. And at a night time, he would actually drink as well. But then he'd have these days where he wouldn't. So I likened it to a Jekyll and Hyde situation, So I found myself at that particular age thinking to myself, well, do I really want to go down that track? And subconsciously, what I did was I chose a different pathway, I should say, really, from my point of view.
Yeah, and I mean, because we all have our family background and the bouncing off our parents. Is there one message or thought that you can have, that if you have a parent, or even, I guess, a spouse or a relative like that, of how you should handle it?
Well, it's interesting. The conversation really is about who you've got in the way of a peer support group, anyway. And I felt that what happened to me was that I searched for an answer for my father until the very day he died. I was on his deathbed. I raced from London to go to Liverpool to see him passing away. And I asked him all these questions, and he just looked at me, and he just really couldn't give me the answer. So, I was left with this particular limbo. But the interesting thing for me was, it was the peer support that I got. My uncle was the most amazing guy, still is. And he was the one that actually took me away and told me that I was worth something. That at the end of the day, even if I failed my examinations or whatever, that I still had something to give.
So your uncle was possibly that role of a father figure that you didn't have, that older generation that gave you a sense of worth in yourself.
Yeah. But I also had another guy, who's an interesting chap, who was he was a former copper in Liverpool, who had come off his motorbike, when he'd called to a house burglary or whatever, and lost his legs. And I looked after him as a kid. I did jobs for him, and he was able to explain to me how to decorate, how to cook, how to do various things. So he was another mentor for me, without a shadow of a doubt. And I latched on to him.
But you talk about mentors. You're also a bit of a fan of John Lennon, and
yes.
Particularly Give Peace a Chance and Imagine, which we're going to hear at the end of the show, we hope.
Yes.
But that was all out around the time that you were a Marine Commando medic. So tell us give us one of the stories of, you were saving lives. You weren't going out, blowing things up. You were to save lives. So tell us about that.
Well, that's the kind of again, the misconception is that what's happened is that I started off with my medical training. So I had a hard time, literally 2 years, when I had to be fully academic and throw myself into this. And it was a real pass or fail. So, from my point of view, it was the pressure was back on me again. And I was worried, because at the end of the day, if I failed, I was going to go back home to my dad, and he was going to go, there you go, you've done it again. So I stuck at it, Humphrey, and I actually kind of threw myself into the actual medical training, of which there were all kinds of things. And what they were doing was quite an interesting thing. They would train you up to be a ship's doctor, effectively, so a ship's medic, where you could be on the the destroyers or, the aircraft carriers, and you would treat everybody, and you would do minor surgeries, so kind of removal of kind of lumps and so on and so forth for analysis. You would do histology. You would be literally a jack of all trades on that ship, and with this particular wonderful kind of training school. And I have to add, the British side of it, really, the Royal Navy at that time, their medical training was second to none. You could deal with anything, absolutely anything at all. And it's not until I talk to doctors nowadays and I explained to them what we did, and they were just amazed, just marveled at really what we went through. So what happened was there was a shortage of commando medics, and what happened was you could either go into the cast iron coffin brigade, we call them, which was the submariners, or you could stay in the Royal Navy, or you could actually go into the commandos. So I literally jumped into the commandos with my medical training, and I did my commando course. I got my green beret, and and then I got the commando medal. So I was just unbelievable.
Commando medal and a green. Now, what year are we, and what theatres of operation did you work in?
Yeah, so it was 1985, and that was when I passed my course. So I'd already been at sea as well with some of the ships sailing around the Mediterranean as part of the actual exercises, and literally jumped into the commando world. And 1985, I skipped the Falklands. Funny enough, I'd literally just.
I was going to say it's just after the Falklands, isn't it? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I kind of when I was doing my medical training, I actually started to share a house with three guys who were part of the Navy and the Marines as well. And all of a sudden, I went to live there, and they left. They just disappeared to go down to the Falklands, and they left me with all the bills, for the actual the milk and the bread review. So at the end of the day, I was in this house, and they disappeared, and I was left to carry the can. But to me, the progressive side of it, getting into the Marines structure, was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I love the outdoors. I was passionate about my technical skills, and I'd love to be able to mix in with a very small outfit. So I finished the commando unit, and then I went straight into a specialist unit called the Mountain and Arctic Warfare Cadre for the Royal Marines. And they, to this day, are the best band of brothers I've ever come across and ever worked with.
Yeah, that was training up in Norway and the mountains there, or the Arctic and that sort of thing.
The mission was quite kind of interesting. They become military intelligence. That's what their role is nowadays. And it's to actually go in behind enemy lines and to effectively spy and report information back on, as it was then, some of the developments of things overseas, in Norway, in Sweden, different other places on the Russian borders. Yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, we won't. Fascinating, but we're not going to go too far into that because we'll get completely distracted. I just want to ask you one question before we go to the slides that we've got. You then left the military and you joined the BBC, I think, at that stage, and looking at how to keep people safe, or journalists safe, covering wars. Just in a nutshell, how the wars are covered, or with aid workers and that, when you joined, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, and how they're covered now. What would you say is the main difference?
Look, I think that if I may just pick on one point, Humphrey, is that, and again, I got a real contrast of experience with this. It's let's take riots and demonstrations, which are the most highly volatile thing that you can ever come across, really, where everything kind of goes on a switch, And what I found with my particular situation was, at the end of the day, I saw firsthand on the streets of Belfast a lot of the journalists getting it absolutely spectacularly wrong, and were being injured or petrol bombed or set on fire or whatever. So at the end of the day, that was my first mission for the BBC, is to look at the actual public order training and try and see if we could actually get some way of imparting proactive skills. Now, onto the war zone side, okay, from that particular point of view, 1995, and obviously the Balkan War itself was a dirty war, as everyone knows. And what most people don't know out there was a lot more journalists that were killed than there were peacekeepers or whatever, so the numbers were quite high. So when I joined the BBC, I'd already been involved in some of the actual conflicts elsewhere. And I just suddenly realized, why the hell are we sending journalists into a war zone, okay, a war of convenience, that's what I put really for the Balkan War, because it was only 2.5 hour flight away, and we're giving them no training, where at the end of the day in the military, we would have months and months to go in there, with training and skills as well. So it didn't really stack up. And that's when I came to the BBC and said, we have to do something about this. And it wasn't until I brought John's body back, John Schofield's body when he was killed in
John Sadworth, who was shot in Croatia, wasn't he, when during an operation there and that was a big investigation there. Why don't we go now to Ben, if you've got the slides ready, and Tony's going to talk us through who you are and what you do, and please ask questions about it, because all of us have got relatives and friends that get into dangerous places occasionally, even if you're going on a trip to the Mediterranean. Things can go wrong. So Tony is your man. He can keep you safe by answering a question or two. There we are. That's who we're dealing with. Where are you there, Tony?
That was actually on an investigation into in Croatia, and that was a very interesting investigation. Actually, that was to look at. There was a war criminal from here. It was a drug dealer from here who had killed a few people from Australia and had actually absconded, and no one could find him. And that was actually in near Mostar. And so I went all the way through from Croatia through to Bosnia to trace his tracks to find out where he was.
You were looking for him, were you?
Well, yeah, I had a very good team. I had a lady called Jane Kogan, who's don't remember her. She was a journalist that ended up a forensic journalist that went back to Canada. I pulled her in, and I pulled in Sasha Schmidbach, our little fixer from years ago from the war, and a guy, Andy Thompson from Scotland, from the actual the forensic science division, to get information. And we all met in Zagreb, and it was quite funny because it reminded me of Mission Impossible. Your mission, should you choose to accept it. And I gave them the file, and they all had a specific task to look at. So from there, Sasha was looking at the money transactions that were going through banks at the time, purchase of yachts, purchase of houses. And what I was doing really was to try and get a handle on the connectivity of the man that we were looking at, and also the group of criminal activity around Dubrovnik and places like
that. Did you get him in the end, or did he get you?
No, we did. It's a fascinating result, because what happened was we were working with the Victorian police here as well at the time, and backwards and forwards with information, but mainly working for a news network as well, because it was a documentary. And what happened was we found him all the way back in Athens, and so we traced him all the way back to there. And it just so happened that one day, and he laughed about it at the time when he was actually caught. But his wife at the time was a hairdresser, and she put his wig on back to front that day in a cafe. So we ended up with this huge big V on the front of his head. And straight away, we're looking at our photo IDs, and we're going, I think it's him. I think it's him. Maybe not. Then all of a sudden, the wind got up a little bit and moved it, and we went, that's him. So,
that's a good. Let's have the next shot, please, Ben.
Wow.
This is you.
That's all our yesterdays. That was me on a thing called the endurance course, and what it is, it's one of the commando tests that you have to do, and you go around in pairs, and it was myself and this other guy. I think he was from the parachute regiment, this guy. And what you have to do is you have to march out to this location. You have to do an assault course, which involves submerging yourself in a 30-foot tube underwater, so you just breathe in a little bit of air from the top with all your kit. And what happens, Humphrey, is that you're climbing walls and getting back down into little culverts and pushing people through tubes as well. And it's synonymous with the commando course. And when you have to then run back to camp, which I think it was about something like 8K, and with all your webbing and all your kit, you're soaking. So
soaking wet. So all of that. And this is 1985, is it? Ish.
And it's January 1985, which is absolutely bloody cold.
No leaves on. It looks a little bit like Dad's army, I've got to say, with those woolen hats and those old rifles on your back.
Let me tell you about the woolen hat. That's called the cap comforter. And what happens is that when you finish the commando course, they rip that off you very unceremoniously and throw it on the floor. And then they place the green beret on your head. And that, to me, is an absolute supercharged moment, because you have that thing around with you. And Prince Edward, when he did his course, he forgot his mess tins in the field. And what happened was the training PTI, physical training instructor that was looking after him, said to him, "Well, you've got a cap comforter, haven't you?" So he had to eat out of his cap comforter for the whole of the part of the course that he was left on. Really.
God. So we lodge ourselves there in 1985, and let's go to the next slide, because I think that shows us this is you now, isn't it?
This is the company. I mean, look, it was an absolute leap of faith, really, Humphrey, because I was leaving to come to Australia in 2003, and I started the company. And I mentioned to a gentleman called Tony Nates, who was absolutely fantastic from the EBU, and I said to him, "Look, I'm leaving," and he said, "Can we please keep in touch? Can we retain you with EBU for all of our particular war zone missions, areas of conflict, and sports and events and all that stuff?" And I did, and I stayed with them. I provided, a service for them up until last year. So it was remarkable. And this was the company Zero Risk that I started. And we were a very small outfit in 2003, but then we started to get some really good breaks working with Qantas and Jetstar, looking at violence in cabin crew environments at something like 32,000 feet. How can you deal with, two people having a punch up? And we provided their occupational violence training program. And we branched into other areas besides the media. And we've got a very, very good track record now of dealing with high risk as a company with all kinds of weird and wonderful environments.
Okay. So now I want to start going through explaining to our audience what you teach people how to keep safe. And I think we begin that with the next slide.
Okay.
This is ballistics, isn't it? So tell us about this.
This was an amazing course, actually, where Al Jazeera had 8 correspondents, and they could not train anywhere out of Egypt. And the only country they could train was in France because of the Schengen Agreement. So what happened was ZDF actually sponsored the whole event, and they brought them over to here. It was a lovely lady, fantastic lady called Yvette, who she was working for ZDF at the time, and she actually kind of sponsored this course. And what it is, this is a live bullet penetration demonstration. And what we did, if you don't remember this, back in 1995, when I pulled the first hostile environments course together, we had a range of about 200 meters, and it went all the way through to about 400 meters. And what we did, we actually used to fire at doors, bricks. You can see in the background there, legs of lamb hanging from there. You've got concrete, you've got breeze blocks there as well. And what we were doing was we were showing the course things you could hide behind and actually give you very good protection, and explain that the breeze blocks are not really the right thing to actually hide behind.
It's going to go straight through. A high velocity goes straight through that, doesn't it?
It does, and what it does is it creates the secondary projectile, which is the actual brick fragment itself, which I've found in many a body. And often enough, it's not the actual the lead or the full metal jacket that causes the injury. It's actually sometimes the fragmentation that's picked up along the way, Humphrey, to penetrate the body.
I remember, I think, from one of those courses that the safest thing to get behind is a tree. Is that right? Because you're not sure what anything else is.
Well, no. And look, the thing is that what I've researched as well in various investigations is that what you've actually got is some countries. You probably kind of leave it to your own imagination. When they're trying to target journalists or try to take people out that they don't want there, they will use bricks like the breeze block and so on and so forth as ricochets. So they'll fire the bullet at the actual wall to ricochet the bullet around the object into where the actual journalists are, or where the NGOs are as well. And I've proven that on 2 occasions that that was the tactic that was held. But other areas like limestone buildings, for instance, create an incredible plug-in mechanism where the bullet just sinks into the plug, into the actual wall itself, because it's soft. Whereas harder bricks themselves will create ricochet. But coming back to your point, the tree is definitely the one to hide behind. But you have to get as low as possible to also reduce your profile around the side of that tree.
And when we see in the movies the cops shielding behind a car door and that sort of thing, that's all rubbish, is that it would just go straight through into them?
Well, what we did, which was spectacular for you, if you remember rightly, we actually kind of had a car, and it was a car that we could write off. So we had, we blew it up, we shot it, everything really, and it wasn't kind of a salubrious one. But what I showed with the machete is I put a machete straight through the door. Okay, and it was actually kind of a real vision
like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that was just a machete, and it was a forceful motion as opposed to a hack or a slash.
Yeah.
And but then we actually talked, for the journalist teams anyway, that the best place to be is actually in the front wheel, crouching down by the side of the front wheel near the engine block. And it's funny because during the Ukraine, the very beginning, there's that remarkable footage of Sky bailing out their vehicle, coming under fire when they'd actually wandered into no man's land, and also a Russian attack group as well. And I was thinking at the time, because you can hear glass going off and there's a lot of distracted sounds, is how they would have coped with that. But it certainly wasn't the clean drill that we teach on the course. It seemed to be a bit of a free-for-all where they were bailing out that car and hyperventilating.
Just so much never survives contact with reality. But the lesson takeaway from this one is that if anything happens like that, go for a tree or go for the engine block of a car.
But the other important thing with this one, Humphrey, as well, which when I was doing the investigations in Israel and in the Palestinian areas as well, I couldn't believe that the journalists themselves weren't aware of how far these bullets could travel, how, in other words, in what line. And to me, this course in particular, what we did, we actually stood the journalists further downfield on the range itself, and we fired over the top of their heads with live rounds. So that was a game changer, because you could hear the mosquito sound as the bullet went past your head, and you could count in real time just exactly where the weapon was coming from. We've got a calculated kind of a timer, So that was a great course where they realized they lived in the Middle East, they knew of these particular specific threats, but at the end of the day, they were able to understand where the weapon was and where it was being fired and where was the bullet traveling to. And that was a real eye-opener for them. All
right. Next one, please, Ben, because we've only got half an hour left. Goodness. What are you doing here?
No, this is just a normal night out with zero risk, actually, Humphrey. But it's a thing called dislocation of expectation, and what it is that when you have a situation where you go into a checkpoint or whatever, and you're taken by militia, we put them through probably about 3 hours worth of detention, where we really put them through the ringer to figure out how they're going to cope in a situation like that for real. And all of them that have come out of this scenario have turned around and said, that was amazing. That's exactly what I needed to get my head into what I can say, what I can do, where I've got my kit on me. Do I need to make a run for it? Do we need to kind of try and call somebody? Where do I put my mobile phone? And we've had people that have come back to the BBC even, and recently, where they've said that scenario proved invaluable for them when they were held captive in Somalia and different other places as well. So
the thing is that with the gun shootings in the States and the sort of randomness of how the world works now, that this could now happen to anybody. You could suddenly come under gunfire. You could suddenly, come up against some thugs that are going to put a sack over your head. Give us I'm going to rush a little bit through this, Tony, but give us the two takeaways. If you get into this situation, what are the top lines of what you should and should not do?
Two main points, okay, from my particular point of view, is you have to get your breathing sorted out very, very quickly, because you could hyperventilate very quickly, and especially with a sack on your head, it's going to become very, very unpleasant because you're blowing out carbon dioxide. Second thing is to try and go on a journey. So in other words, that will slow your breathing down, a pleasant journey, okay, and try and disconnect from the scenario at the time if you can. That will help you out. And the third thing really with detentions, what people fail to do on every single course that we run, they fail to actually kind of ask if they can call somebody. They just stand there and they're processed and they're left there. And basically they don't have the nous to say, or the gumption, look, I need to call somebody, something dreadful's gone wrong here. I think it might be a mistaken identity, whatever. And the last thing I'll say, when you're negotiating with any of these people, never negotiate and start talking about politics, religion, or your own strong points of view, because that would be your really at the end of the day.
And you don't say, do you know who I am? You'll you'll be sorry for this.
We had a BBC journalist, very prominent chap, who our name kind of will be kind of remain confidential, who did exactly that, and he actually got really pasted because at the time, like, the BBC wasn't really favourable in that particular neck of the woods. Yeah. So you have to really try and remain the grey man, okay, and try and suss things out before you even go to open your mouth, because you don't even know just exactly what's coming, really.
Remain the grey man. We remember that. And the next one, we have another scenario, I think, coming up here.
Yeah, this was this was for a group of cabin crew, I think. And what I'm talking about here is basically what happens if you're grabbed from behind, what you can actually do from a kind of an occupational violence point of view. And we've got a brilliant package. It's on our security app, actually, Humphrey, where you've got 5 modules. And as you go through these modules, you'll deal with verbal judo, as we call it. So it's actually kind of, the interaction between somebody when they're really aggressive in your face. And then the second one's a grab or a pull or a push or whatever. But this is the worst case scenario, when somebody actually goes to a rear naked chokehold when they're trying to drag you back or whatever. So right. We've got a couple of techniques that we teach people here. And for cabin crew in particular, they normally carry a pen. So they can pull the pen out from here, and they can use it as a stab implement or a tool to actually move back from here, or push it into the arm, or let the arm drop.
Okay, that's and so, I mean, when we see this in the movies, they kick the shin or something like this, but no.
No, because what happens, the girls always say this as well, which is an interesting point. I will kick them in the balls. Okay, and you go, right, okay, let's see you try to do that. And look, a few times they can actually be successful, they can hit the target. But often enough, what happens is they're on one leg. When they're on one leg, all of a sudden they're off balance and they're on the floor. There's a rape or attack or whatever. So stay on your feet. That's our particular motto.
Stay on your feet, yeah. And the same thing, I presume, is be the grey man.
Yeah, you've got to, well, actually, you've also got to remain confident, because the wallflowers, okay, are the ones that will get a lot more of a serious kind of treatment. The person who is confident to turn around and talk back and say, look, you have got conquest. What do you want? Do you want money? Okay, well, there's your money. What do you want? Do you want this? Okay, because these are all items that you can actually get back. Your life you can't. That's what we say. It's the old Craven adage: no story's worth a life, really. From that particular point. Yeah.
Okay, and the next one. Where are we next?
Oh, there we go.
Where are you?
These 2 characters are the 2 guys on the right-hand side there. One of them is in charge of our intelligence team. And so he roves around all the countries. He actually has meetings with various people, from police to airport security authorities. But we have just landed in Bangladesh. And it is an eye-opener for anyone that travels there for the first time as to, just exactly how desolate some of these places can be in a major city as well, as you know, where you've traveled. So we've all met there. We're doing a big briefing on what's going on, and we're looking after a client, a really good high-end client, moving them around to some of the factories to visit some of the garments and to check on quality assurance and to make sure that everything's okay. So we provide protection. Owen in the middle there is one of our security operators, and carefully selected, and he's basically he just kind of blends in with the rest of the guys. This is a bit of a corporate shot for us anyway, but generally what happens is they ride within the vehicle, teach the driver how to drive around certain places, and we vet the cars and we vet all the transport to make sure they're actually 100%.
Can I just sort of double check on this? The Bangladesh garment factory, which is where our shirts and hats and all that come from, Bangladesh is a developing country. It's got, crime problems and the rest of it. They need people like you to keep them safe.
Yeah, it's a wider brief, Humphrey, really. I mean, look, you can look at the top end, really, and you look at the terrorist activity. Jamaat Mujahideen Bangladesh, infiltrated by IS. We got in there in 2016 when Jamaat Mujahideen Bangladesh actually attacked the Holy Artisan Cafe and killed a lot of expats in that one cafe hit, which lasted for 2 days. But it's not just about that. It's actually looking at all of our guys are top level medical trained. And so we can look at medically sorting them out before we have to drive them to a hospital or whatever, which could be, in Dakar terms, 6 hours easily to get to a hospital, because of the traffic being horrendous.
Right.
But we look after, we arrange the meeting. We have got the app, the security app that we actually communicate on. We know when the riots are going off. And one of your UK famous kind of food brands last year were in a meeting in Dakar, and the alarm went up when the workers rioted against the management and broke into the boardroom and were threatening these guys.
I remember that. It sounds as if we've got an aeroplane landing outside. So can we go to the next slide, Tony, and I'll go and handle the aeroplane. Tell us what that is.
That's lovely, Beck Wilkins. She's actually one of our top former military personnel. And what she's doing is she's actually providing intelligence briefing on the moving kind of flow of the demonstration, what is happening. So we're reporting back to all of our particular clients as to what the actual the specific threat level is, and what we need to do to make them safe, and also the potential attacks on the buildings that you can probably see around there at the time. But what we've got here quite clearly is we've got a lot of tear gas that's come, and we then wear our own particular full face protection with filters. And what Beck would do, she would actually kind of be the main person on the ground to make sure that everyone's safe as well. So we also provide back watching for the journalists, as you can see in your top left-hand frame here, because what you've got with the camera crews, they've got very much tunnel vision. So they need somebody behind them to see what's going on. We've had stories where the cameraman is filming away, as you remember, and all of a sudden it's come up with a screwdriver and stabbed him, in the back or, in the leg or whatever. So the back watcher we've got now in the way of Beck or one of our team is there with them all the time, just keeping an eye 360 on what's going on.
What year? I mean, I think many of us remember, say, Martin Bell getting wounded in Bosnia in 95-ish, 94, 95. What year did organizations start hiring people to watch the camera crews back? So watch whatever the security guards that came on board.
Well, I introduced it as a staffer at the BBC, and what it was as a result of the riots, really. So I'd say it would probably be in around about 1996 or 97. Mm-hmm. And the reason why, Humphrey, was because in riots in particular, the crews were flying blind. They really couldn't. They weren't spatially aware. We had Clarence Mitchell, one of the reporters, was reporting from Abdullah Öcalan's arrest, and I think it was. In the centre of London somewhere, I can't remember the place now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of course, just behind him, a woman sets herself on fire, self-immolation. She kind of just went straight up from review. And Clarence came back close to actually kind of catching fire with his suit and his hairspray on his hair and everything else for that matter. So, the backwatcher side of it, I introduced really because I wanted to make sure we had somebody who was looking after them. And it's not just backwatching. When you've got news crews out on the ground, as you know, you often forget to eat or drink because you're actually so involved in the story. Yeah. No one's looking after you. So that's what our backwatching team do, is they take things out to make things like, as a little bit more comfortable for everybody.
I mean, the importance of getting a hot meal, for example, as opposed to just a packet of Pringles or something is, in order to keep going.
You're spot on with that, because your stomach is your engine for your body, really. And what we did is we actually, if you remember rightly, we started to introduce these particular ready-made meals. So you can actually have a chemical sachet on the outside of the bag that reacted, like a little kind of magnesium strip or whatever. We create the heat and then we heat the meal for you. And everyone said to me, they'd finish at 1 o'clock in the morning on London Bridge, during the actual May Day nights. But they were all fed. They were all looked after. So it was perfect.
Yeah. Let's have the next one, Ben.
Gosh. This was a really bad situation. I was there at the time, and there was this gentleman who filmed this bit here. It was one of the AFP journalists, and he got one of the slides. He might have another slide in a minute, but he got the Pulitzer Prize for one specific slide, and this was a female suicide bomber.
And where are we? Which country are we in?
Afghanistan. So this is in Kabul.
Afghanistan, right? Yes. Okay.
And look, to be honest with you, Humphrey, everyone ran out that day. I was actually doing something different, like, but everyone ran out that day to go and cover this. Yeah. And it's remarkable because what happens is to me, most of the people like this gentleman here are just piled up on a truck, and they die of positional asphyxia because all the bodies are piled up, and it's the kind of. So
you're wounded, and you've got bodies on top of you, and you suffocate.
That's right. Yeah. So what I hear is that, and it's working remarkably well, is to have a quick response force for the organization so that the vehicle itself is next to the event. This was a religious event that was being filmed. Mm. So that if we did have a casualty like this, they'd be loaded into the QRF that we developed with emergency assistance, with intravenous drips in there, intubation gear, like airway gear. And so we could preserve life for at least a couple of hours so we can get them to a proper medical facility. And they weren't being crushed by the weight of the other casualties, and we didn't even know where they'd gone to. So that was something we developed with AFP, fun enough, with Mark Levine and a couple of other guys there as well. It was a lifesaver, absolute lifesaver.
That's and the next one, please, Ben. Let's hope it's not quite as gruesome as, this looks a happier shot. Where are we here?
These were great. This is actually in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is one of the actual districts just off the airport of Kabul. And these here, this guy on the right-hand side, actually, I've tipped him to become one of the main boxers in the Olympics in the next Olympics. He is fast, and the other guys, the guy on the left-hand side there is a sergeant who is part of the actual the guard force there, and the other guys there.
Are they your staff, or you training them up for somebody else?
Now, what happened was, it was quite interesting. Mohammed Karzai actually decreed that that Westerners can't really hold security contracts anymore, that it has to be locals. So what he did was, his brother actually had this thing going where at the end of the day, everyone was given brand new AK-47s and brand new uniforms like this, but they were also given the guards, okay? And so like agencies like BBC, Reuters, AFP, whatever you, were all given guards like this. But what we did with the AFP was quite remarkable. We dug our heels in to make sure that we kept these guys and weren't given anybody else, and we kept our own weapons as well. And because there was a spat at the time of blue on blue, as we call it, where the guard force had opened up on the.
Where they shoot each other. I mean, not shoot each other, but they look quite mean, these guys.
They were really good guys, actually, and the hardest part for them, Humphrey, was actually kind of taking their kit off, getting outside the main gate and putting a bit of a disguise on to get back home, so that pick them up. Any organization would pick them up. So, and they were paid well, but they became part of the family. And what I had to do with these guys was to train them in how to deal with an attack, a 21-gun Taliban attack coming over the top of the compound with an IED explosive device, smash in the middle of the compound. So this was the end of what we call a huge big alleyway that led towards the American embassy.
Right.
And what I was doing there was provide them. I was actually also doing weapons checks on them as well. Okay, and simple thing I found, if you look at the magazines on the photograph there, they would keep the same magazine loaded all the time, so the spring would stretch, and they weren't taking all their bullets out to change them over on, to release the tension on the spring. So what you would get then is a jam of the actual weapon, and that's fatal when you've actually.
So just go back on that for those laymen amongst us, is that you have to keep rotating your bullets in the magazine in order to make sure the spring doesn't jam.
Yeah, and you also have to clean the magazines out as well, because some of these guys leave the magazines on the floor in the background there where they go and eat or say have prayers or whatever. And Afghanistan, and for people that have been there before, and certain other countries I've been to, is massively high in dust and dirt as well. It's a huge big suspension of dust and dirt, and if it gets into the magazine or the working parts where there's supposed to be a light oil in there, then it can cause a jam. That's a fatal mistake.
That's it. And I think we've got a couple more. Next one.
That's my view.
This is your reach, isn't it? Yes.
It is. Yes, we've got a very, very interesting. If you look at the top tier there, looking at Jamie Ross all the way through to Ajit Patel, they were all the former Queen's bodyguards. They've dropped out of the house itself, the Royal Corridor, and also part of Scotland Yard as well. And Jamie Ross there is my commander-in-chief, I call him, and the chief of staff, and is regularly in all these countries. So he's got a very big footprint in these countries and very well respected. And all of our clients, love him. And, he actually kind of organizes everybody. On the other side of the coast, we've actually got a thing called a sun up, sun down. So we've got cover on the left-hand side with Richard Patton, who is a good contact. He's the descendant of Sir General Patton, Blood and Guts.
Oh, okay, yes. So
very good.
So this is your global reach. I mean, you've got people in the States keeping people safe, as well as in Latin America and Asia and Middle East. So it's not just those places we see as war zones. It's actually all over the world.
No, because if you look at Freddie over in the corner there in Colombia, okay, one of our major clients at the moment is a mining company, oil and gas mining, and they're drawing a lot of materials out of Brazil at the moment. So we've actually got a big footprint in South America. So that's what we do, and we've just opened up a new simulated training area where we've actually got mock villages. We've actually got actors and actresses that come in and out with Andy Bolt. Andy Bolt's the former special operations guy for the Americans. And that's in South Carolina. So we're now starting to open up our doors anyway for hostile environments training within America, actually, Humphrey.
Okay. And I think we have one more shot, do we? No, this is our final. This is, where are you there? That's a selfie, isn't it, Tony?
That's on, I think that was on the Turkish-Syrian border that we did a trip on many years ago. And that was actually an interesting time, because what we were trying to figure out was, what was it like in Gaziantep? How we would get people in from there, from kind of Syria coming back into there, and looking at where the oil was being smuggled out as well on the Turkish border. So we were quite a bit there. And we have got some interesting assignments coming up there now in the refugee camps that are, on the northern side of Syria, and getting TV crews into there at the moment as we speak to report on that.
And that's a sort of a logo image photograph. It looks like something out of a James Bond movie.
Well, actually, talking of which, here's an interesting one. One of the things we branched out into 2 years ago, as we had the grade A-listers, so the Matt Damons and the kind of, the different other celebrities that we brought across to Australia to film Thor, the movie and what have you, and they all came in on their private jets, of course. And so that's the other thing that we had to do, is we had to make sure there was a bit of a smooth transition of landing, being tested for these people, and then moving them into a quarantine zone that we looked after ourselves.
Okay.
We did that. It was really good. It was very effective, the actual bubble that we created. But here's what we don't know about. We also protected all of the factories in Bangladesh when COVID hit, because we could see, Humphrey, that everything was going to get decimated. And the industry, which is 80% of the world's fabrics and textiles, would go overnight. So what we did was created a bubble with the unions over there, with the factory owners, and they carried on from a productivity point of view all the way through COVID without missing a beat.
So I've got this shirt because you kept the factory workers safe during COVID.
Yep.
I've got to thank you for that, Tony. I mean, we don't know these things. Ben, can we go back to the two of us now? Because I'm thank you, thanks so much for that. We have a question in from Celia. How do you find a team suited to such specialist and courageous work? How do you pick your people?
A very good question, Celia. What's happened is there's a lot of what we call Walter Mitties out there, people who've got a CV that looks fantastic on paper, but when you come to the practical and the truth test, it doesn't stack up. So we tend to get a lot of people word of mouth, and people that come onto the tour, as we call them, for the Royalty Protection Team or ex-Special Forces who have left, who want to do some kind of part-time work for us as well when they're rotating through. I've got a good feel for individuals, and I actually kind of make sure that we have some separate interviews with individuals as well, whether it's through Zoom or whatever. But generally, they've come through from word of mouth, and a lot of the times they've got some very brilliant specialist skills. The most important thing for me, though, is that they get on with the client. That at the end of the day, they don't actually just kind of mess it up for everybody else by being a soldier, being a warrior, and not understanding the corporate image.
I mean, that is important, isn't it? Because if you take people with military training, they are very used to sort of giving orders and having them obeyed or taking them, and the sort of staccato type of personal interaction. Whereas what you need is something slightly more sociable, isn't it?
We actually call it the third eye, or hands off, or soft hands, we call it. You don't need somebody that's going to be breathing down on somebody when they're having meetings. You just need somebody that's going to pass them to the little sticky note to say, it's time for us to leave now, sir. Okay. So at the end of the day, it gives them confidence to actually contain themselves, within their business meeting to get the best effect they can, whilst we are aware of all the, the problems that are going on outside these meetings or these areas as well. So it's good.
And Gita Garg is asking, how do you deal with people arguing at 30,000 feet? Great question.
Well, actually, I can tell you some really interesting stories here. What we try and do is we try and let some of the ladies actually kind of calm the situation down. We find some of the guys in particular, they become a bit more volatile. They become a bit more beat the chest kind of thing, they'll kind of confront a little bit. But it's teamwork, and all of the airlines themselves will practice hand signals. Okay, I've got a problem. It's over here. Okay, there's two people actually. Do you know what I mean? So we do it very subtly. But if they have to put somebody down on the floor, it will be all of them together, and it will be a stacks-on arrangement. And the training that we've delivered so far has been very, very effective. There was a guy who tried to take over an aircraft quite a few years ago, and he made wooden stakes. And he got on the aircraft, and what happened was he put the wooden stakes in his trench coat, and he went for the cabin crew. And what happened was they managed to force him onto the floor and landed on stacks on, as they actually got everyone was on top of him and just completely subdued him until they got the plastic.
So he literally can't move because of the body weight. Now we're going to go to the promos and then back to you in a second, but I just want to go back to your John Lennon and Give Peace a Chance. I don't want you to play us out yet, Tony, but did you have a sort of vision of, supposing there was a war, nobody came, give peace a chance, imagine there's no war? Is that still a vision with you?
I'd like to say yes, okay. And the sad thing is that even being isolated here in Australia, I just keep seeing there's one thing after another. It's almost like flash fires, spot fires happening all over the place, Copenhagen, America, Africa, And to me, I don't think we've got any respite from this at the moment, because I think that post-COVID, we're hitting this real kind of desperation bubble where individuals themselves, are falling short on finance or commitments and things. And I can't see it, but I'm hoping, that certain countries will actually kind of rally around and create this stronger union and bond. We've already seen that anyway against Russia, which is a dreadful example of a total takeover.
We haven't even had time. We've rushed through. You'll have to come back on the show, and I'm going to tell everybody why you're coming back on the show sometime later in a moment. But sit there, Tony, because coming up on July the 14th, that is later this week, Lucinda, she is just back, I think, from sailing the Adriatic, and she's been in Croatia and Split and all those places that we worked, Tony, during the Bosnian War. And she's going to be with the great crime writer, Janice Hallett, whose new book is The Twyford Code, a mind-bending, heartwarming mystery. And the Sunday Times called Janice the Queen of Tricksy Crime. Then on Friday the 15th, Lucinda is with Kirsty Stonell-Walker, author of Stunner, The Rise and Fall of Fanny Cornworth, a Victorian supermodel whose face epitomized the vision and life of the pre-Raphaelite artist Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And then the great Alistair Hignell is on Purpose, Passion and Grit, is with Gillian Ann Burns, England international women's rugby player, won the 1994 World Cup. That will be a fantastic show. And then Lucinda on Purpose, Passion and Grit, July the 26th, is with Patricia Debney, campaigner, author, and survivor of child abuse. Let me see, Tony, I've just got, Gita says, you and your team are incredible. Thanks for all you do. Yes, and we've questioned, we dealt with the question of arguing at 30,000 feet. But what I want to say is, because we're going to have you back on the show, you are putting all this between covers. Tell us about that.
Very, very briefly, I kind of had this particular, I went on a kind of a show called the Richard Fidler's Conversation Hour about my life and, life and times. And then all of a sudden, everyone kind of called in and said, when's the book coming out? We want to see the book, we want to see the book. So I've done it. I actually spent probably the best part of the last 18 months pulling it together. And it spans from the age of 5, very, very humorous anecdotes from Liverpool back in the UK, where I went through the School of Hard Knocks. And I went all the way through to the BBC, as Humphrey said, and then came out and had my own company. But there's some really interesting stuff in there, and it's a lot about the investigations that I did, and some remarkable stuff. So I'm really, really pleased.
What is the book's title, and when do we see it on the bookshelves?
The book is Zero Risk. It's been taken up by, which is the company's kind of, the name. It's been taken up by Juliet Rogers, who from Echo Publishing, and it's going to be rolled out by Bonnier. So I met with them in London to discuss exactly what's going on. So next year, around about July or August time, we hope to see it on the shelves. And I'm looking forward to it.
About a year from now. And Lilette Baptist says, can't wait for the book. Karen says, fabulous, so glad you and your team are helping keep people safe. I want you to pick up your guitar, because Goldster, Purpose, Passion and Grit is going to end with a song of hope. Don't start playing yet, because I'm just going to say that, in fact, you can start playing and I'm going to talk over you and then keep playing until we fade you out, Tony. We are at 0 hour with Zero Risks, and we're going to hear John Lennon's Imagine by Tony Loughran, our guest. Thank you for a fascinating insight into a world we all see on our TV screens, but have no idea exactly how it works. Thank you, Karen, everybody, for that. Until Thursday, Lucinda and the Queen of Trixie Crime. From all of us at Goldster, stay curious, stay involved. Tony.
Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country, isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. No religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope someday you'll join me, and the world will live as one.
Tony, brilliant. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody. Fantastic. Benedict Marine Commando and a guitarist, singer, and our guest for today, Tony Loughran. Bye.
Lovely. Thanks, everybody. All the best. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, says Gita. Yes, says Karen. See you.
Thank you.